Ladies and gentlemen, you know what toxic people want more than anything else: control. Control of your emotions, your reactions, your peace of mind. And the truth is, they don't need to be right to win. They just need you to react. The powerful shift that changes everything: move from reaction to response. See, when you react, you're giving them the keys. You're letting their words, their tone, their negativity drive your next move. But when you respond, or sometimes choose not to respond at all, you take back the will. Toxic people feed off your energy. They don't want answers. They want chaos. So when you don't give them the show, when you stay calm, collected, and steady, you starve their control. Think of it this way: every time you argue back, defend yourself endlessly, or try to prove them wrong, you're pouring fuel on their fire. But the moment you stop fueling it, the flames start dying out. Boundaries are not drawn in the heat of an argument. They're built in silence, in consistency, and choosing peace over proving a point. And here's the part most people miss: you don't have to win against toxic people. You just have to stop letting them play the game with your emotions. The shift is simple, but it's powerful. React to nothing. Respond with intention, and watch their control disappear. Toxic people thrive on reaction, not reason. That's their playground. That's their fuel. They don't need facts. They don't need truth. And they don't even need to be right. All they need is your reaction. Because the moment you give it to them, they know they've pulled you into their game. See, toxic people rarely win through logic. They win through disruption. They want to shake your calm, provoke your emotions, and pull you down to a level where you feel powerless. When you react, whether it's through anger, defensiveness, or even over-explaining, you're actually giving them what they want most: proof that they can control how you feel, and that's all they need to keep going. It's easy to believe that if you just explain yourself better or prove your point louder, you'll finally make them see reason. But toxic people don't operate on reason. They're not looking for understanding. They're looking for control. The more energy you spend trying to make them see your perspective, the deeper you get trapped in their cycle. It's not about winning an argument for them. It's about keeping you emotionally hooked. And as long as you're hooked, they're in charge. So here's the shift that changes everything. Instead of giving them reaction, give them nothing. Nothing they can twist, nothing they can use, nothing they can feed on. When you stay calm, when you pause, when you refuse to let their words dictate your behavior, you cut off the supply line. They want sparks, but you give them stillness. They want a storm, but you give them silence. And that silence isn't weakness, it's strength. It's proof that you are in control of you, and nobody else gets to steer that. This doesn't mean you tolerate toxic behavior. Boundaries still matter. But a boundary is not built in shouting matches or long explanations. A boundary is built in consistent action: walking away, limiting access, refusing to engage in chaos. When they throw the bait, you don't bite. When they press the button, you don't move. The less you react, the quicker they realize their usual tricks don't work on you anymore. And when they can't get the reaction, they lose their grip. Think about it. Toxic people thrive on your reaction the way fire thrives on oxygen. Remove the air and the flames die down on their own. You don't have to fight the fire with more fire. You just have to stop feeding it. And that's where your power lives. Not in louder words, not in sharper comebacks, but in the quiet decision that you won't let someone else control your peace. So the next time a toxic person tries to pull you into their storm, remember this truth: they can only thrive if you let them. Stay calm, stay steady, and don't hand them the reaction they're hunting for. Because once you stop reacting, they stop winning. And when they stop winning, you finally get your peace back. The shift is moving from reaction to response. That's where the real change begins. And it's one of the most powerful decisions you can make when dealing with toxic people. A reaction is instant, raw, and usually emotional. It's that knee-jerk impulse to defend yourself, to argue back, or to match their energy. A response, however, is thoughtful. It's measured. It's a choice. And the difference between the two is the difference between handing over your control or keeping. When you react, you're letting someone else dictate the pace of the conversation. They push, you push back. They accuse, you defend, they provoke, you explode. In that moment, they're not just controlling the argument, they're controlling you. But when you shift to responding instead of reacting, you create space between what they say and what you decide to do with it. That space is where your power lives. It's where you can choose clarity over chaos, calm over conflict, and wisdom over impulse. Responding doesn't mean you're passive. It doesn't mean you're weak or that you let things slide. Quite the opposite. It means you're strategic. Instead of falling into their trap, you step outside of it. A response might be silence. It might be a simple boundary, or it might even be walking away. The point is you choose, you decide the tone, the timing, and the energy you put into it. And when you decide, they no longer control the outcome. The shift also changes the way you feel afterward. When you react, you often regret it later. You replay the words in your head, wishing you had stayed calmer or said something different. But when you respond, you walk away knowing you stayed in control. You didn't let them drag you into their chaos, and that alone gives you peace. The confidence that comes from that is powerful. It builds over time, making you stronger and more resilient each time you choose it. Think of it this way. A reaction is like swinging blindly at every punch thrown at you. You waste your energy, you miss your target, and you leave yourself wide open. A response is like stepping back, watching carefully, and then choosing the exact moment to act, or sometimes not to act at all. That's strategy. That's control. And that's how you stop toxic people from feeding off you. The beauty of this shift is that it's simple. You don't need the perfect words or a clever comeback. You just need to pause. That pause breaks the cycle, and in that pause you decide, will I give them the reaction they want, or will I choose a response that protects my peace? At the end of the day, toxic people can't control a calm mind. They can't win against silence. They can't manipulate someone who refuses to play the game. So the shift is clear. Stop reacting, start responding, and watch their control fade away. Because once you master your response, you master yourself. And when you master yourself, nobody else can. Silence and calm are stronger than over-explaining. When you deal with toxic people, your first instinct is often to defend yourself, to make them understand your point of view, or to clear up every lie and every twist of your words. But here's the hard truth. Toxic people don't care about understanding. They care about control. The more you explain, the more material you hand them to twist, the more energy you give them to manipulate, and the deeper you fall into their trap. That's why silence and calm are such powerful tools. They don't give the other person anything to grab onto. Over-explaining is a form of seeking validation. It's the hope that if you just explain enough, they'll finally understand you, or stop attacking. But toxic people aren't looking for clarity. They're looking for a reaction. Every extra word you give them is like adding fuel to their fire. They will spin your explanations back at you, question your motives, or accuse you of something else entirely. That's how the cycle keeps going. You explain, they distort. You defend, they attack again. It never ends, because they don't want resolution. They want control over your emotions. Silence, on the other hand, leaves them with nothing. When you choose calm over chaos, you refuse to hand them the reaction they're chasing. Silence says more than 1,000 explanations ever could. It tells them you are not shaken, you are not desperate to be understood, and you are not going to waste your energy on someone who isn't listening. Calm is not weakness, it's It takes strength to resist the urge to argue back, to stay steady when someone is trying to knock you off balance. That strength speaks louder than words. Think about the last time you over-explained yourself. Did it really solve the problem, or did it just prolong the argument? Now think about the power of sitting in calm silence. Toxic people hate silence because it strips them of control. They can't manipulate silence. They can't twist calm. When you stop feeding the fire, their flames start to die out on their own. And in that stillness, you keep your peace. This doesn't mean you let everything slide. It means you choose when and how to use your voice. Instead of 10 minutes of over-explaining, you give one clear statement or none at all. Instead of reacting with anger, you breathe, you pause, and you let your calm presence do the talk. That's how boundaries are built, not in long speeches, but in consistent, steady action. In the end of the day, silence and calm are stronger than over-explaining, because they protect your energy. They stop you from pouring yourself into a bottomless pit of arguments. You can never win. They remind you that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. And when you hold on to that calm, toxic people lose their grip. Because no matter how loud they get, nothing is stronger than someone who refuses to be moved. Boundaries aren't built with words, but with consistency. You can tell someone over and over what your limits are, what you will and will not accept. But words alone rarely change behavior. Toxic people especially don't respect words. They may nod, pretend to listen, or even agree in the moment, but the real test comes after. They want to see if you mean what you say, and that's where consistency steps in. Boundaries aren't proven by how clearly you talk about them, they're proven by how firmly you enforce them. When you're inconsistent, toxic people learn quickly that your limits are negotiable. You might say, I don't tolerate being disrespected, but if you let them speak to you with disrespect and continue the conversation, you've already shown them that your boundary is flexible. It's not what you said, it's what you allowed, and toxic people thrive on those cracks. They test, they push, and they look for loopholes. Every time you let a boundary slide, they see it as permission to keep going. Consistency, however, sends a completely different message. When your actions match your words every time, you become unshakable. If you say you won't stay in conversations filled with yelling and you actually walk away each time it happens, you show that your words carry weight. If you say you won't answer late-night messages and you actually stop replying, you prove you mean it. Over time, toxic people realize that pushing your limits won't work because you don't just talk about boundaries, you live them. And here's the thing, consistency doesn't need an explanation. You don't have to give a speech every time you enforce a boundary. In fact, over-explaining often weakens the boundary because it invites debate. Boundaries are not about convincing someone else to agree with you. They're about protecting your peace, whether they agree or not. A simple action, a pause, a walk away, a refusal to engage, speaks volumes without you having to say a word. Consistency also builds trust in yourself. Each time you stick to your boundary, you reinforce your own self-respect. You prove to yourself that you value your well-being enough to protect it, even when it's uncomfortable. That self-trust grows stronger the more consistent you are, and it becomes harder and harder for toxic people to shake you. Think of boundaries like a fence. You can tell people where the fence is all day long, but if it's full of holes, they'll walk right through. Consistency is what builds the solid fence. Clear, firm, and not up for debate. And once that fence is there, people either respect it or they stay out. At the end of the day, boundaries aren't about controlling other people. They're about controlling what you allow in your space. Words can announce them, but only consistency makes them real. And when you live your boundaries instead of just talking about them, you send the strongest message of all. My peace is not negotiable. When you stop feeding the fire, it burns itself out. Toxic people operate much like flames. They grow hotter and louder the more fuel they receive. Every argument, every defensive explanation, every emotional outburst is like tossing wood onto their fire. The more you give, the bigger it grows. And before long, you find yourself drained, exhausted, and consumed by something that never should have had that much power over you in the first place. The truth is, you can't outshout, outreason, or outfight someone who thrives on conflict. The only way to shrink their fire is to stop feeding it. That doesn't mean you ignore everything in silence, out of fear. It means you understand that your reaction is the oxygen they need. They thrive on pulling you into a storm where you feel the need to prove yourself, defend yourself, or fight to be heard. But when you choose calm, when you choose distance, when you refuse to match their chaos with more chaos, you starve the fire. At first, they may get louder, try harder, or throw bigger sparks to get you to react. But fires always weaken without fuel. Sooner or later they lose momentum because you simply won't play their game. This is why detachment is such a powerful skill. It's not that you stop caring about your dignity or your peace. It's that you stop investing your energy where it only gets wasted. Toxic people cannot stand stillness because it exposes their emptiness. They push, they provoke, they prod. But when nothing comes back, they are left with themselves. And the truth is, they don't know what to do without your energy keeping the fire alive. Of course, choosing not to feed the fire requires discipline. It's not easy to resist when someone is pressing every button you have. It feels unnatural to hold back your defense when you're being misunderstood or disrespected. But strength isn't found in reacting, it's found in restraint. Each time you withhold the fuel, you remind yourself that your peace matters more than their drama. You prove to yourself that you don't have to match their chaos. You can rise above it. Over time, the fire that once felt overwhelming will fade into ember. Not because the toxic person changed, but because you did. You stopped giving them what they needed to keep the cycle alive. And when the fire burns out, you're left with something even more valuable: clarity. You can see how much energy you used to waste on battles you never needed to fight. You can recognize the strength in silence, the freedom in calm, and the power of choosing peace over reaction. When you stop feeding the fire, it burns itself out. And when it does, you discover something even greater. You don't need to fight every flame, you only need to protect your energy. Let the noise die down. And remember this: no one can keep a fire alive if you refuse to be the fuel. Control is lost the moment you let them decide your emotions. Toxic people know this better than anyone. They don't need to overpower you physically or prove you wrong logically. All they need to do is make you feel something they can control. Anger, frustration, guilt, shame. Those emotions are like levers they can pull. The second they can trigger a reaction in you, they're no longer just part of your environment. They're in the driver's seat of your mood, your behavior, and sometimes even your decisions. And the most dangerous part is it often happens without you noticing. When someone can push your buttons and predict how you'll react, you've handed them a kind of remote control to your life. They know if they raise their voice, you'll argue back. They know if they play the victim, you'll over-explain. They know if they criticize you, you'll bend over backward to prove them wrong. And with every triggered emotion, you give away a piece of your control. You're no longer deciding from a place of clarity. You're reacting from a place of chaos, exactly where they want you. But here's the truth: your emotions are yours. They don't belong to anyone else. And no one has the right to dictate them unless you let them. Taking back control means creating space between what they do and how you feel. It's about noticing the trigger but refusing to let it own you. You can't always stop people from trying to manipulate, but you can stop them from succeeding by not giving them the emotional reaction they're hunting for. And this is where emotional discipline comes in. It's not about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about being intentional. Instead of exploding when provoked, you pause. Instead of defending when accused, you breathe. Instead of rushing to fix their narrative, you stay calm and let their words hang in the air. That calmness is power. It frustrates toxic people because it shows them they don't control you anymore. They can throw the bait, but if you don't bite, they can't reel you in. Think about how much energy you've wasted in the past on people who didn't deserve it. Long arguments, sleepless nights, endless attempts to prove your worth. All of that came from letting someone else dictate your emotion. Now imagine what it feels like to be untouchable, to stay grounded no matter what chaos is swirling around you. That's what happens when you take back control. You choose peace over reaction, clarity over chaos, and strength over weakness. At the end of the day, control is never taken. It's surrendered. And toxic people only have as much control as you allow them to have. The moment you decide that your emotions belong to you and you alone, their grip starts to fade. They lose the power they once held because you refuse to hand it over. Control is lost the moment you let them decide your emotions. But control is regained the moment you remember that your peace is not up for negotiation. When it comes down to it, toxic people only have the power we hand them. They thrive on our reactions, not our reason. They try to pull us into chaos because chaos is where they feel in control. But the moment we shift from reaction to response, when we choose silence and calm over explaining, when we stop feeding their fire and start building consistent boundaries, everything changes. Control isn't about shutting others down. It's about refusing to let them dictate your emotions, your peace, or your self-worth. The powerful shift is simple, but it requires discipline. Take back the remote to your own emotions. Respond with intent, stay consistent with your boundaries, and protect your peace at all costs. Because when you stop giving them control, their grip fades, and what's left is freedom. You're free.